If you felt like buying a house has become almost impossible lately, I need to tell you something that might change how you see the entire housing market. There are companies out there, right now, buying up single-family homes, not to live in them, but purely as investments. And in some cities, the numbers are staggering. According to a study from the Urban Institute, institutional investors now own roughly 3.8% of all single-family rental homes in the country. On the surface, that might sound small, but that number is not spread out evenly. In Atlanta, Georgia, large institutional owners controlled approximately 25% of single-family rentals. That's 1 out of every 4 rental homes in an entire major American city, owned not by families, but by investment firms. Now, here's where a lot of confusion comes in, and I want to clear this up immediately, because there's a massive amount of misinformation floating around online about who's actually doing this. You've probably seen posts claiming that BlackRock, the world's largest asset manager, is secretly buying up hundreds of thousands of homes. I need to be straight with you. That claim is false, and BlackRock has repeatedly and publicly stated they do not buy single-family homes. They've even built an entire website specifically to correct this misunderstanding. The confusion comes from a different company with a very similar name, Blackstone, a completely separate private equity firm with no relation to BlackRock. Blackstone actually founded a company called Invitation Homes, which genuinely is one of the largest owners of single-family rental homes in America, with around 80,000 properties. They're not alone either. Pretium, through its subsidiary Progress Residential, owns roughly 70,000 homes. American Homes 4, Rent owns around 53,000 more. Combined, these firms and others like them represent a real, measurable shift in who owns the homes in your neighborhood. And here's what makes this story urgent right now. Just this January, President Trump proposed banning large institutional investors from purchasing any additional single-family homes, specifically framing it as a fight to protect what he called the American dream of homeownership. So today I'm breaking down exactly who these companies are, how this actually affects your ability to buy or rent a home, and what this new proposal could mean if it actually becomes policy. Let's break down how we actually got here, because this didn't happen overnight. This trend traces back to the 2008 financial crisis. When the housing market collapsed, millions of homes went into foreclosure almost simultaneously. Large investment firms saw an opportunity that had never existed before at this scale: the chance to buy enormous numbers of single-family homes in bulk, at deeply discounted prices, and turn them into long-term rental income. Blackstone was one of the first major players to move aggressively into this space, which is exactly how Invitation Homes was born. Since then, several other firms have followed the same playbook, building massive single-family rental portfolios piece by piece, house by house. Now, why does this actually matter to someone just trying to buy a home today? When a company with billions of dollars in available capital competes for the same house as a regular family, the family is almost always at a disadvantage. Institutional buyers can often pay in cash, close deals faster, and waive contingencies that a typical buyer relying on a mortgage simply cannot. In neighborhoods where this activity is concentrated, like parts of Atlanta, Phoenix, and other Sunbelt cities, this can meaningfully drive up competition and prices for everyday buyers trying to purchase their first home. There's also the rental side of this equation. Once these firms own a property, they operate it as a business, which means optimizing for profit. Critics argue this can lead to more aggressive rent increases compared to smaller individual landlords, since large firms have more resources dedicated specifically to maximizing returns across their entire portfolio. This is exactly the tension behind the proposal Trump introduced this January. The plan would specifically target large institutional investors, restricting their ability to purchase additional single-family homes going forward. The stated goal is to free up more housing inventory for individual families and first-time buyers, rather than large investment portfolios. It's worth noting this isn't happening in isolation either. Some state governments have already begun exploring similar restrictions. Both Oregon and Minnesota have proposed their own legislation aimed at limiting institutional purchases of single-family homes within their states. Now, I want to present this fairly because there are two real sides to this debate. Supporters of restricting institutional buying argue it would help level the playing field for regular families trying to compete in an already difficult market. On the other side, some housing economists caution that institutional investors are not actually the primary driver of high home prices. They point to more fundamental issues, like a genuine shortage of new home construction, restrictive zoning laws, and higher interest rates, as much larger factors in why homes have become so expensive. Even Urban Institute research itself is careful to point out that while institutional ownership is real and growing in specific markets, nationally it still represents a relatively small slice of the overall housing market, roughly that 3.8% figure I mentioned earlier. So where does this actually leave you, especially if you're currently trying to buy your first home? Right now, this Trump proposal is exactly that, a proposal. It has not been passed into law. Any real version of this policy would need to go through Congress, and the details, which investors it applies to, how enforcement would work, whether existing properties would be affected, are all still completely undetermined. What I do think is worth understanding is the bigger picture here. This isn't really about one company or one villain. It's about a genuine structural shift in how housing gets bought and owned in this country, one that's been building slowly since 2008 and is only now getting serious political attention. If you're currently house hunting, especially in markets like Atlanta, Phoenix, or other cities with heavier institutional presence, it's worth knowing that some of your competition may genuinely be large, well-capitalized firms rather than other individual families. That doesn't mean it's impossible to buy a home. It means understanding the market you're actually competing in, working with a knowledgeable local agent, and in some cases, considering markets or neighborhoods with lower institutional concentration can genuinely make a difference. I also want to be clear about something important. This video isn't meant to tell you who to blame for housing costs. As we just covered, the honest answer involves multiple overlapping factors: construction shortages, zoning restrictions, interest rates, and yes, institutional buying, all playing a role together. Anyone telling you it's simply one company or one villain isn't giving you the full picture. What I'll be watching closely is whether this proposal actually gains traction in Congress and whether more states follow Oregon and Minnesota's lead with their own legislation. If real, concrete policy does emerge here, the details will matter enormously, and I'll break it down the moment there's something solid to analyze. Let me know in the comments, do you think restricting institutional home buying would actually make housing more affordable, or is this targeting the wrong problem? I'm genuinely curious what you think, and if you want to stay ahead of stories like this as they develop, make sure you're subscribed, because there's a lot moving in this space right now. See you in the next one.